All right. Hello, 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 and welcome to the Loyalty and Friends podcast, self love podcast, right here on YouTube. And part of giving yourself self love to me is about telling your stories because you don't even understand the power when you really just speak out on the things that happen to you. It just gives you this a different, energy because for one, when you first tell your story, it does come from a place of hurt. But the more and more you tell it, you get more power, and then you tell it from a place of healing. So we have our brother Albert here, Albert Grieve, and he's gonna, shed some light on some things that he went through. We did part one of our interview where he did an introduction, but I'm gonna let him give another brief introduction for this audience here. But yes, you all make sure y'all go travel over to Instagram Live. Of course, the Instagram page is Loyalty and Everything. So you can see the first part of our interview. And yes, we're going to dive into it because this one is going to be a little bit deeper. I want to dive a little deeper so we can truly just get the gist of his story and just how it inspired him to do what he's doing today. So go right ahead, Mr. Albert. The mic is on you.
Well, again, I appreciate the opportunity to share my story and try to take the past adversity that I endured and turn it into something positive. I grew up in Sacramento, California, in a very abusive environment. I First of all, some of the things I may say may serve as a trigger for something you or someone you know may have experienced. So if you need to exercise some self-care, please do so. I've learned that sharing my story, my childhood, is traumatizing. I can use terms like cruel and unusual punishment, incest, and homicide to describe my childhood. And it's shocking for a lot of people. And then when I finally was removed from that environment, I endured the foster system, which posed a whole new set of issues and adversity. And even when I finally got in a placement where I was thriving, then I was told my senior year of high school, before I even graduated, that I was going to have to move out and be homeless. So here I am on March 1st of 2003, trying to figure out where I'm going to live, how I'm going to provide for myself, instead of focusing on my scholastic endeavors. And at the time, I was a 4.0 in high school. I was a varsity wrestler, editor of my school paper. But I've found a way to continue pushing forward, and I came to the Midwest with 2 UPS boxes to my name. I graduated valedictorian from an HBCU, Lincoln University. I served in law enforcement, and I vigorously pursued domestic violence cases because I was just able to ask different questions and connect with those people in a different way because I had those lived experiences. I went to St. Louis University School of Law. While I was there, all my internships, all my work was prosecutorial in nature, all about trying to put the abuser in jail. It had been my driving force since my childhood. But when I actually graduated from law school, I started working for the Department of Social Services because I had the opportunity to work for kids directly. So I was a litigation attorney for several years. I took cases from one corner of Missouri to the other. And I like to say I aged in dog years. So let's just say I was there for 14 years. But it was difficult for me because there were so many cases and there was so much turnover. I didn't want to make a mistake. I want to get every case right. I want to get every filing, every briefing, every argument, every motion, because I was that kid and I had a lot of self-induced stress. And it's a very difficult profession to begin with. Then you add the secondary trauma from the cases you're dealing with, and then my personal history and trauma. So I moved over to Missouri Children's Division directly, and I provided training, legal aspects training to juvenile officers, social workers, law enforcement, etc. Still had a lot of self-induced stress because if I didn't teach them the law correctly, then when they went in someone's home, then maybe they violated the parents' rights. And so then the kid goes back into an unsafe environment because of some procedural issue, some sort of hiccup. And it's still a difficult job in that there's a lot of turnover. And I would have people in my class, I'm trying to teach them, but they're having to step out because they're working cases for kids. And it was just a difficult situation. Then COVID hit in 2020. My youngest son was born, which is a wonderful thing, but I took a step back to kind of work on myself. And so then I became an author of a children's book, and I continued doing training on the side for Missouri Office of Prosecuting Services, using myself as a case example and my records and history of being in care. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah, so I love it. And so, what I want to start with this part of your interview is to kind of go down your childhood memory lane a little bit. I know that can be a little challenging, especially because you dealt with a lot of trauma. And we want to speak about prior to you being placed in the foster home, and then some of the trauma things, the traumatized experiences you had even in when you was a foster child. So let's kind of speak prior to foster, being in the foster home first.
Okay.
Explain some of that trauma.
So I've as I continue to present and share my story, I've tried to dig deeper. So one of the things I did was requested my records. Because after so much time, it's amazing what the mind will do. You try to repress memories, and then when they resurface, you ask yourself, "Am I recalling this correctly?" So it was really eye opening when I got my records, and not only did it corroborate what I recalled, but it added so much detail. And looking back, I've really begun to appreciate that my mom, I really believe she was misdiagnosed. So my mom grew up in domestic violence. She was sexually abused as a child. And
Mm.
instead of trauma informed care, they labeled her as depressed and put her on meds. And then she met my father, who was an angry and abusive alcoholic who had his own history, right? And so every time there would be a domestic violence episode, my father would weaponize my mom's mental health. And so her diagnosis would change from depression to paranoia schizophrenia. He would tell law enforcement, being the charismatic individual that he was, while my mom was like freaking out and disheveled because she thought her husband was trying to kill her. He would tell the authorities, "My wife is having a delusional episode. Here are the meds that she's on," and they would put her in a mental institution. And that happened again and again. It seemed like it happened about every 6 months. And then parallel to this, while that was going on, unfortunately, my father liked to have sex, and so let me add this one little piece. So my physical abuse started increasing over time. By the second or third grade, it got to a point where I wasn't even starting school on time because I was healing from injuries. And we would get these concerned phone calls home, but then there was nothing done to ensure there's treatment or services to prevent the type of harm. It's basically telling my father, "Hey, we know what you're doing and we don't like it." And so the abuse started getting worse and worse. But it would change in form. We would learn how to hide it, keep it away from prying eyes. We would learn to lie, and I'd be really good at making those social workers leave because I would tell whatever story we had fabricated. But it was
Right.
still difficult for me to process. So late at night, I would have trouble going to sleep. And so one of the things I would do is I would bang my head on a pillow till I just became exhausted and I fell asleep, and then try to make it to the next morning. Well, my sister didn't like that because it would keep them up. So I would start staying awake until my sisters went to sleep. And then that's when I learned my father would come into the bedroom and have sex with my older sister. And so now I have to wait for this to go on. And, just even speaking about that, it's hard to think about because as a child, why didn't I do something to prevent it, right? I have a lot of guilt from my childhood, but just to fast forward, this would go on. And then when he would leave, then I would do my head banging ritual and then try to go to sleep, and then this cycle continued to happen. Um, and I often overlooked it because I was afraid to go to sleep. I was afraid to wake up. My father was like OCD perfectionist, but since he was an angry and abusive alcoholic, we'd get punished for failing to meet these unattainable standards. So like in the middle of the night, I'd be on the top bunk bed. He'd grab me by my ankle. He'd pull me out of bed, and I'd just drop on the floor. He'd start beating me, and he'd make me go wash the dishes. I'm like 7 or 8 years old. I mean, this type of stuff was normal. But there was a lot of strangulation. I mean, there was a concerned phone call home when I was in fifth grade. My younger sister was about to go into third grade. I had said something to the teacher, but I failed to provide the proper context, and the teacher didn't know what it meant. So he called home, and my father got mad because here it is, the authorities are calling home. So when he got off the phone, I got home that day. He threw me on the ground. He sat on my chest. He started punching me full on my face, and my tooth is still chipped to this day. And this is just like kind of normal stuff going on as far as
Right.
abuse is concerned. One of the worst beatings I got is I was placed in a sleeping bag, um, and it was actually my mom that did it. And I think it was because she wanted to put guardrails on how bad I would be abused by my father. But because of this OCD perfectionism, she was really good at disciplining me as well. So she put me in this sleeping bag, and I remember trying to talk to her and convince her that I would never do it again. It's because I spilled some soda. Promise I'll never drink soda again as a child. I'll never spill it again. Trying to convince her to not make this happen, but I failed. In that moment, I think losing hope is probably what hurt me the most. But she put me all the way in the sleeping bag, head and everything. She grabbed the wooden pole that you hang your clothes on in the closet, and she started beating me with it. And at first, when she hits high, you block high. She hits low, you block low. You learn as a child to just block your head and take the rest of
Right.
your blows to the body. And this was just like the normal type of stuff. That's some of the abuse and stuff prior to
Prior
the
to.
actual homicide.
Yes. So I wanted to first tell you, ma'am, I'm sorry you had to go through a lot of that. And it's sad when you're a child and you have to see abuse and you see others that you truly love being abused. And you have to still remember, like, to let the guilt go because you're still a child. There's only so much you can do, and intervening can actually make the matters worse. So although you had to experience, it wasn't your fault. You already children who was actually taking on the abuse.
Yeah.
So, and it's sad how the system. We got to blame the system as well. The system has failed a lot of children, especially back then, because I remember elementary, as my beginning stages of elementary, they still had the laws where even your teacher could pretty much discipline you, physically discipline you. So I had been paddled even by my teacher, and even back then, like, your neighbors could discipline you, like pretty much anybody. If they was a bystander, they seen what was going on, they can discipline. So I think that's why they started to change that narrative, where certain punishment is not considered child abuse. However, that wasn't a such thing as when we were growing up at some point. It was just the way that you was disciplined, unfortunately. And it caused a lot of trauma for a lot of us.
But
So,
I want to say this though, because I actually do not blame the system because I'm someone that has worked from the system, and one of the things that contributed the most is a lack of resources. And so, if
okay.
you have a staff that is utterly overwhelmed and just trying to keep their head above their water, their head above water, and going from case to case, they will miss things. If there's not enough training, they don't know what to look for, and those types of things contributed to us feeling unsafe and uncomfortable speaking out to authorities. And so as a child, I learned that they were going to write things down and leave. But that to me is more of a societal issue because we're not speaking up and increasing awareness saying, hey, these are issues that we care about. We want our elected officials to ensure there's proper funding and proper resources. I want law enforcement, if they want a training on domestic violence, they should be able to get one that answers all their questions and provide them the tools that are necessary immediately. So as a first responder, when they get that 911 call, they know what to do. I unfortunately, because of scheduling and stuff, I've got trainings that are scheduled for law enforcement that are 4, 5, 6 months out. So what happens in the meantime if you're calling 911 and they're responding? So maybe they determine the dominant physical aggressor, they take them to jail, they bond out, go right back home. Is anything really better, or is it made worse? So I mean, I think we have to take responsibility. It's responsibility as a society to speak up and try to make some of these changes.
And I like your viewpoint on that. I truly like your viewpoint on that. So let's dive a little bit more into, okay, what age were you when you were placed in foster home, in the foster program?
Okay.
And what were some of your experiences you dealt with in that
So
environment?
there's an important piece that happened before I actually came into care because when I was in the summer of 1998, so I'm 38 years old right now. Until my age, it is what it is, right? I got a kid that's driving, about to go to college, right? So I'm getting older. But
I have one in college, so I understand.
I don't like it, but right. But my in the summer of 1998, there was a situation where my mom tried to run away again. Sometimes she would make it out of the house. Sometimes my father would beat her and prevent her from leaving. This is the time where she actually made it out the door. So he grabbed a hammer, and the story was that he was trying to scare her back inside the house. He hit her in the head with the hammer. They had to call an ambulance, and she got taken to the hospital, and they had to give her stitches. After they stitched her up, they put her in a mental institution because they thought, once again, that she was delusional. In that case, Child Protective Services conducted interviews. They thought all of us children were lying, we're parentified, and we're trying to protect our father, which is 100% true. But then, once again, despite our history, they closed the case out and they took no action. The district attorney declined to press charges because they didn't want his kids to go into foster care. My mom stayed in a mental institution until she recanted, which happened time and time again and always reinforced that narrative that she was delusional. At that point, they had jacked her medicine up to the point where they were coming weekly to give her Halidol shots because she kept making phone calls and screaming, thinking that her husband is trying to kill her and was abusive. And everyone saw this as her just simply being delusional. Fast forward a couple months, because that was the last opportunity to intervene. My mom tried to run away again, and she didn't make it. She went to the bedroom window in the master bedroom, and my father grabbed her, threw her on the ground. He asked myself and my siblings to get belts and socks, and he hog-tied her up. But once he had tied her up, the story being that we didn't want her to be in a mental institution until during Christmas and stuff. That was a story that we always had to tell. But once she was lying there on the ground in a hog-tied position, face down, he stood on the back of her head. He jumped up and down on her, and then she perished. The actually the next day she was discovered. He actually thought about us doing a group suicide, but honestly, it would have been 3 more homicides and a suicide. He fully thought that he was going to get arrested. We had a cat at the time who had also been abused. He would hold the cat out the window and threaten to kill the cat and kick the cat and everything as a form of abuse. So domestic violence, when there's kids present, when there's animals present, especially when you have these really, possibility of these indicators of homicide, indicators of fatalities, is really bad domestic violence. You're going to see that there's abuse to the kids, there's abuse to animals, there's a lot of other stuff going on. So we had all the indicators, all the lethality indicators.
Right.
He had given the cat to the next door neighbor. We went to the fire department. They came and they got my mom. When she was untied, she was still in that same hog-tied position. As a child, age 13, I learned what rigor mortis is. They carried my mom out. Her face was smashed and bloodied. Her clothes were soiled. And we went to school the next day. We went to school the next week. We actually stayed there for several more months. My father literally got away with homicide, and it wasn't enough for us to come into care. My older sister, and actually I want to bring that up because I'm working on something with LP. My older sister actually tried to kill him unsuccessfully. So then she tried to kill herself. And that's what finally got her to be removed. But my younger sister and I still stayed there for 2 more days until my older sister made allegations of all this sexual abuse. And then we finally came into care. And so then we got into a foster system. And so this is like when my life really began. But then I was placed in a group home with juvenile delinquents and people who are mentally disabled as a social services child care. I wasn't a bad kid, I came from a bad environment, but then they put me in almost like a disciplinary type of facility as emergency placement because no one really wanted a teenager. And so that was my emergency placement for 2.5 years in a residential facility. So that brings me to foster care. So right. I'm sorry, I know that's a lot. I don't mean to put all that on you, but that's
and I'm gonna tell you, as hard as it is for some people to hear this, this is what really happens in a lot of homes, and people don't speak out about it. They're scared. They live in fear and not faith, and just feel like their situation is never going to get better. And a lot of times it don't. So it's like, why am I going to keep telling people when nothing's going to get done about it? And it's sad. And I just feel like it's all our due diligence and our responsibility to save any child, even if it's not your child. If you see the abuse or you're aware of it, we should stand up as a community. It's not even just the parents' responsibility, it's us. Like at one point, the community was raising the children. It wasn't just the parents, So I truly feel like as far as that aspect, we got to get back to that, So I advocate for all children, not just mine.
Well, speaking of children, so obviously I'm trying to speak up and speak out, increase awareness so we can get more active in who we're electing, who are making funding decisions to ensure there are mechanisms in place to prevent this type of stuff or to intervene. But I also want to reach out to the child because I speak to social workers and they'll have this kid on their caseload that's just can't keep them in a placement. They're acting out. They're having all these issues. And that was me. You have these kids that may lash out or engage in self-destructive behavior. You have a caregiver that wants to open up their forever home to his child, and then they move into the home and they're cussing them out and punching holes in the wall, and they're freaking out. They're like, I can't deal with this, and they're calling 911. And so now you have this traumatized youth. We're putting handcuffs on them and taking them out of the facility.
Right.
And it's kind of like Carfax, if you're familiar with it. No one wants a 4 or 5-year-old car that's had 13 different owners. Well, unfortunately, a kid that goes from placement to placement becomes harder to place somewhere else. And so I wanted to reach out to the kid. So I created this children's book to try to give a child a voice so they have a means to express themselves so they can start that process of healing a whole lot sooner. Because although to a certain extent I have healed by sharing my story, for educational purposes, scholarships, etc. It wasn't really until I was older as an adult, as an attorney, that I started presenting at older youth conferences and at and trainings and things like that, to where I was able to start speaking up. And then not till this calendar year, where I actually started getting on social media, that I've actually started looking at my own mental health and trying to uncover the layers of trauma and work through some of those things. So I think a lot of times I had been projecting from my wounds instead of a place from healing. But if I could start that process in a child sooner, then that's what I did. And so I created a children's book, and I don't mean to jump ahead of you. It's
Oh
entitled.
no, I'm liking that. So that's exactly where we need to be heading. So yes, speak on your book. Like, let us know a
All
little
right.
bit about.
So this is Little One You Are Loved, and and I designed it to be a tool first and foremost for social workers. In that I left gaps in the story of what happened with Little One, so a child may have the opportunity to add details. And if they do add details, then that is the possibility for a forensic interview, a disclosure to be made, so we can actually find out what's going on. Because that was the issue with me, is that no one ever figured out what was going on until several months after a homicide, which that's way too late. But this is a story about a child, and I try not to assign any gender, so it's Little One. And at first, everything's fine, loving parents, but then one day everything starts getting strange, and Little One actually internalizes all the negativity around them. They end up getting in several different placements, and so they started lashing out. Right? They reached into their toolbox of coping modalities and chose impenetrable defenses, and they started pushing everyone away. And that happens with a lot of youth. They don't know who to trust. And let's not even start this. I know you're going to move me somewhere else, so let's fast forward to that part. And so they start pushing everyone away, and it prevents them from being able to get help. Ultimately, Little One gets in a home, a placement where there is a caring and nurturing environment that is supportive no matter what. And through that process, Little One begins to heal and goes from someone who is surviving to someone who is thriving. And so it's just a simple message I want to reach out to kids, also to caregivers, so they know you may have a kid that has layers of trauma that an adult would have difficulty processing. But it's important to have that conversation and work through it. And actually, what you're playing is at the time, my 8-year-old son read this story, and we made the story free. So the book is available for purchase on YouTube, but I think it's a story that everyone should have access to, whether or not you have money. So it's free on YouTube, 100%, just to start that conversation and begin that process of healing. And then for my son, just showing that you could break the generational trauma. Like in the first generation, like my kids will never know the type of atrocities that I went through. And so he actually got to read this story, and I told him basically the goal is to bring a smile to a little child's face. So just having him involved in that is rewarding to me. I love the process. So
Well, Albert, you touched on so many things, and to what you're saying is why to this day, I advocate for my niece, because we went through some traumatized things where
yes.
my brother did some traumatic things to not only me but to one of mine. Okay, and now I'm raising his daughter, and as challenging as it can be, I went through the program, the fosterhood program, so I'm very familiar with a lot of those terminology. They give it to you raw. You got to know it in and out. And again, just be willing to deal with some of the trauma that these children been through. Don't just give up on them so easily, because it's hard, especially when they're bouncing from house to house. So, she's 3, and I feel like, her standing in the home with me in a healthy environment can really change the narrative for her and what her future can look like. So I'm still going through the system, and hopefully I will be her guardian very soon. I got court coming up. Actually, next Tuesday, so I will be in
Right.
court. But
Another process.
and today is her birthday, so
Happy
happy birthday!
birthday.
Yes, today is her birthday. She just officially turned 3 today.
But how
But
can we not stand up for them?
yes, we have to. We have to. We have to, Abby. Like, to what you're saying. Like, so I didn't understand, because I told God I didn't want no more children. I have 3 beautiful girls. Don't get me wrong. I have a 21-year-old daughter. I have one that's 19, and I have a 15-year-old daughter. And now I'm raising a 3-year-old. But I feel like God assigned me to her, and it was important that I be obedient, because I potentially saved a life and saved her through some traumatic things that we had to witness and experience. So
But it's not just saving lives. We are changing family trees, right?
yeah.
When you make this generational change. So I'm the first one in my family to get a degree, period, let alone a terminal degree. And so my oldest son, in 1 week, he got called from Duke and Notre Dame. He had a letter in the mail from Harvard. I'm like, Harvard knows my kid's name, right? So his kids will never know the type of stuff. So it's not just that we're saving lives, but we're changing family trees.
We're changing it. We're the ones to break those generational curses. So it starts with us, So I encourage everyone. It's not easy. It's not easy talking about these things that we had to experience, but it's important and it's necessary. So we can break the generational curse, and for our grandchildren and great grands and more to come, for the next generations to come, for sure.
Yeah. So when I talk about it, sometimes I refer to, when we talk about breaking those generational traumas, those bonds, I am the broken link. I am broken, and acknowledging that is important, because then you start the process of putting the pieces together. There's this Japanese art form called kintsugi. Are you familiar with it?
Yes.
You take pottery that's broken, they put it together with gold, and then you actually have something that's better than the initial product. So I think through that process, we become a better version of ourselves, and then we're able to teach so many lessons to our kids to ensure that we're changing those family trees.
So, Albert, I know we went over on time a bit, but it's okay. I want to invite you all who are maybe listening or watching this, come over to Clubhouse, because we're going to do a question and answer type of format where you can join the stage. It is just the audio, so you don't have to be seen whatsoever, but you can actually come and engage in the conversation, ask any questions, just give him his accolades just for being, so vulnerable and transparent in his story. Also, make sure y'all support his book, okay? I think this book is very helpful for a lot of children, and just to let them know, like, they are loved, in spite of what they're going through, that someone is out here advocating for each and every one of them as well. So I thank you so much. Before we wrap this up, I do want you to let the people know how can they access your book, or how can they support you in general, because you're doing quite a few things here in the community.
Yeah, no, I'm most active on Instagram at Begin the New Cycle. YouTube, Begin the New Cycle. It's the same thing. The book, you can actually find it online. You can Google it you can find it under my channel, Begin the New Cycle, or you can Google the book, Little One You're Loved. But before I jump off, one of the projects I'm working on is I'm trying to have intentional conversations with my sisters, because when we came into care, we all got split up. And so that alone makes it really hard to work on a relationship. So we're actually recording the conversations, and we're going to start putting that out. So maybe other people, not only will we be able to heal as a sibling group and be able to process some of the trauma and have really difficult conversations, but hopefully it will encourage other people to do the same. And it's not our fault that we went through these types of things. And so we shouldn't be losing decades of time because we're afraid to talk to each other. We're walking on eggshells, because when we do talk to each other, we're bringing up these horrible memories. But we're working on trying to build bridges between one another. LP is recording and monitoring and helping that. So keep a lookout for that. And then also the training that I do, I use my records and documentation to tell my story. I'm actually working on a manuscript, and I'm working on that full book to put that out as well. So a few projects I'm working on, but I appreciate any support. And if the story resonates with you, like, share, subscribe, and just put the story out for free. I don't care. The YouTube video, just so that message can get to those that need to hear it. So.
Absolutely. And I want to thank LP as well, because LP definitely made this happen, my brother. He has an amazing podcast as well. So you can give a shout out to your podcast. And again, you all, at the top of the hour, we will transition and go over to the Clubhouse community so we can do a question and answer QA style, where you all can join and engage in the conversation just as much. And, speak on some things you might be going through or experiencing. We want to be there just for you all as well. So, LP, go ahead and tell them a little bit about your podcast.
All right. So if you want, you can go to Trigger Warning Talk Podcast, all 4 words, Trigger Warning Talk Podcast. The name speaks for itself. It is triggering to a lot of people. We talk about traumas under the umbrella of mental health. We discussed 4 main components. We have human and sex trafficking, domestic violence, sexually based offenses, and true crime. And under the true crime banner, we, in every episode, each interview that we do, we cover a missing person case. 99% of those cases are melanated men, women, and children. It could be a runaway, it could be a kidnapping, it could be an abduction. We wanted to bring the same media attention and energy to those stories and those individuals that we don't see in mainstream media. And so I interviewed Albert last month on the Trigger Warning Talk podcast. and you can check that out. Again, we're streaming on all major platforms. You can also watch this interview. We're on Spotify, the free version, or you can go to my YouTube channel, which is my company's name. So if you just Google me or search for LP, you can find the links to that. But Trigger Warning Talk Podcast, LP
Thank
out.
you so much. And thank you so much, Albert. I really appreciate you. This has been amazing. And maybe we can get your sister, encourage them to even come and do that family conversation. I think that's much needed. I think you all going through that is going to help me and my family because we're kind of definitely at a distance and at odds right now, but I do believe in healing, and it starts with conversation. And LP know my saying is we can be conversational. It doesn't always have to be confrontational, be willing to have that conversation with your brothers and your sisters for sure. So thank you all. If this was helpful for any of you, make sure you all share it. Make sure we get the message out there. We want to continue to shed light on these type of situations. I know it's very graphic, but it was much needed, and I definitely look forward to having a follow-up interview with our brother Albert. So with that being said, we're going to switch gears. You all join us on Clubhouse. If you need the link to Clubhouse, or if you're not a part of the community, join and come to the Loyalty and Friends house right there on Clubhouse. Until next time, we'll see y'all. Bye.